Welcome. Please take your seats and silence your cell phones. Our program is about to begin.
Hi everyone, welcome to Story Studio. We're so thrilled to have you all here. My name is Lindsay Cuyava, I'm from the CGI team, and I am so thrilled to introduce to you our host for this session, Sophie BEREN.
Thanks, Lindsay. Hi everyone. Thank you so much, Lindsay, and to the entire CGI team for having me today. I'm so glad that we have such an intimate room together, so please feel free to lean in, and if anything you hear today resonates with you, share some snaps. I want this to be a conversation for all of us. And since we're here at Story Studio, I thought it would be appropriate to start with a story. I will never forget where I was sitting in my 7th grade history classroom in Wichita, Kansas, on the day we started learning about the Holocaust. That was already a pretty intense unit to be learning as a 7th grader, let alone it became more complicated by the elephant in the room. I was the only Jewish student in my grade, and at the time in my entire middle school. And every time our teacher would mention anything remotely Jewish, all of my classmates would physically turn their heads to stare at me. And I can still remember how that felt in the moment. I just wanted to curl up into a ball and make myself invisible. Because in that moment, I felt so misunderstood and ashamed of who I was. But what kept me going was the dream of the day that I would leave the Midwest behind for college and find my people. So when that day arrived, I guess you could say I sprinted down the yellow brick road all the way to the East Coast for school. And before the end of my first year, I surrounded myself with all Jewish students. I did what my younger self so wanted, and I joined every Jewish club under the sun. I also even found myself a Jewish boyfriend. My parents were so happy. And one day, as I was walking through campus, something hit me. Every single person who I had met in a classroom or at the dining hall was gathered in groups of people who were like them. I couldn't believe it. My peers were doing the exact same thing as I was, but with their respective identity groups. And for the first time, I thought to myself that maybe I had it all wrong. Maybe I was actually taking for granted my entire upbringing in Kansas when I was surrounded with people who were different than me. because I thought surrounding myself with people who were like me was the key to belonging, when in fact it was very far from that. In that moment, I thought to myself, I actually know so much more about myself, my beliefs, and the world around me through the exploration of others. And staying inside of a bubble of people who shared my same background was comfortable, but it wasn't belonging. And I like to think back to what my younger self so badly needed sitting in that classroom, and what I needed was a voice. Because you see, what I couldn't realize at the time was that my classmates simply didn't understand who I was. Every single person has different experiences, identities, and perspectives by which they see the world. And the more and more we continue to build up the walls of our echo chambers and let ignorance be the reason for why we keep one another at arm's length, we're only going to deepen that divide and multiply that misunderstanding. And the reason I couldn't understand that at the time was because I simply didn't know how to have the conversation. This was the moment when I found my voice. When I realized that what made me different was the key to belonging, I knew I could help others realize this too. And in that moment, I realized that I actually want to spend my time on this earth bringing the world back together. And the key to unifying the world just takes us opening up our echo chambers and having conversations with people from all walks of life. Because when we do that, we can learn to coexist, not void of our differences, but because of them. Did you know that 21% of white Americans have never interacted with someone of a different race or ethnicity? Or that 70% of Americans have never met someone who's trans? And as a Kansan, I find this stat in particular stark and interesting, that 33% of young Americans have actually never seen a cow in real life. I know. And if anything, I think these statistics prove to show us that we don't know each other very well. And if we actually take the time to bring us a little bit closer to one another and understand who each other is for the unique experiences, identities, and backgrounds that brought them to that time in existence, we would be able to bring the world back together. And I think the solution is having conversations where we don't try to change one another's minds or bring them over to our side, but have conversations with the intention of listening and understanding one another. This is what inspired me to pass the mic to Gen Z and start my platform, The Conversationalist. We're a nonpartisan educational platform passing the mic to Gen Z and opening up these echo chamber breaking conversations, because when we have those conversations, we're able to bring the world back together where we can sit at the same table. I'm Sophie BEREN, and I'm honored to be your host for Story Studio today. And I hope that by the end of our session, each of us sitting in this room can feel empowered to do our part to bring our country back together. Because you see, unifying doesn't happen overnight, but it's actually much simpler than you think. Because when we can stand firmly in who we are, while simultaneously, opening up ourselves and our minds to the lived experiences of others, we can actually uncover common ground in very unlikely places. And at the end of the day, that can only happen with a single conversation. So without further ado, I am thrilled to introduce our first speakers for Story Studio today. In this next segment, we'll hear from two mayors of different political parties who are working on repaving the roads of political partisanship in their cities through a true belief in democracy, compromise, and rolling up their sleeves to get the work done. We'll first hear from Mayor David HOLT, who is the mayor of the city of Oklahoma in Oklahoma, followed by Mayor Stephen Reed, who is the mayor of the city of Montgomery, Alabama. So I'll welcome Mayor HOLT to the stage.
Thank you, Sophie. Good morning, everybody. Well, my city, Oklahoma City, is America's 20th largest. Though our state has a conservative national reputation, Oklahoma City is quite purple. In the primary county in which Oklahoma City sits, Trump beat Biden by 1 point in 2020. Politically, like America as a whole, we are split down the middle. 20% of our residents are Latino, 14% are Black, and 4% are Asian. By almost every demographic measure, we are a perfect microcosm of America. If America has political division, OKC would not necessarily be immune. In 1995, we experienced the bombing. On what had been a beautiful, sunny morning in Oklahoma City, 168 of our residents were murdered by a right-wing extremist, an American citizen, and a veteran. It was the inevitable outcome when you take political division and dehumanization to its extreme. Since we are at CGI, it is worth noting that President Clinton led our community and our nation through that dark time, striving to hold us together while also seeking justice. We will always be grateful for President Clinton's leadership in response to that horrific event. No. The bombing reminds us why we must have better conversations and find common purpose. I'd like to think that the reminder is eternal, but even in OKC, we are capable of forgetting if we allow ourselves to. I was elected mayor in 2018 in a nonpartisan system where all the candidates must face all the voters and all the voters get to see all the candidates. These are two key principles of an effective electoral system, and it is a system that is the opposite of a closed partisan primary. Though I was a lifelong Republican who had served in the White House of President George W. Bush and in the Oklahoma Senate for 8 years, I made clear as a candidate for mayor that I would serve all of our residents, regardless of political party. I described my approach as one OKC and promised that every community within our city would have a seat at the table, regardless of their political affiliation, their ethnicity, their religion, their sexual orientation, or what part of the city they lived in. And the nature of our city's electoral system allowed me to create that electoral coalition of Republicans and Democrats who may not agree on everything, but just want to work together and get things done. In my first election, I got 78% of the vote in 2018. Republicans and Democrats voted the same way on that day. I have worked for 5 years now to produce outcomes that reflect a broad consensus. It is my conclusion that though you can't please everyone, you can please about 70% of people. But you have to listen, you have to be pragmatic, and you have to actually incorporate different perspectives into the outcome. This is pluralism. And if it seems unique today, it isn't historically. In America, we used to call it compromise. Observers of President Clinton's administration called it triangulation. In OKC, I call it one OKC. This is not incentivized in modern national political life, and it is not incentivized in closed partisan primaries. But it is incentivized in the electoral systems that elect most American mayors. And thank God, because we need at least one functional level of government, and we have it in American cities. In Oklahoma City in 2019, a year and a half into my tenure as mayor, I led the community development of a $1.1 billion initiative funded by a sales tax to build 16 quality of life projects. The 16 projects unabashedly addressed a broad spectrum of priorities. For a mainstream registered Republican focused on economic development, there were investments in an innovation district to support economic growth and construction of a new horse show arena to sustain our visitor economy. For a mainstream registered Democrat focused on human needs, there were investments in mental health crisis centers, a family justice center for survivors of domestic violence, truly affordable housing for people experiencing homelessness, and a civil rights center. No one liked all 16 projects except for the mayor. But that was the way it was supposed to be. The overall outcome was good enough for most of us. This initiative, known locally as MAPS 4, passed the voters of OKC with 72%. That means that thousands of Republicans and Democrats voted the same way on the same day. We've been doing that a lot in Oklahoma City lately, and as long as I'm the mayor, we're going to continue to strive for those outcomes. For the 70% of us in the middle, Oklahoma City's political culture is the manifestation of how American democracy worked for 2 centuries. Given electoral systems that incentivize this behavior, and leaders that are willing to pursue pluralistic outcomes, all of America can work that way again. Thank you very much for your time this morning.
Hello. It's an honor to join you not only on behalf of Montgomery, one of the most historically significant cities in the world, but on behalf of the entire Central Alabama Black Belt region, one that is rich in pain and progress, but one that's also rich in terms of fortitude and triumph, resilience and resistance. It is not lost on me the history of Montgomery, where over the span of 5,000 feet, you can see the true story of our nation. One that starts on the Alabama River, where property was brought to be auctioned off at slave blocks on Commerce Avenue, but also where there's a building where a telegram was sent, starting the Civil War. But shortly, just down the block, there's also a bus stop where a seamstress and an NAACP member decided she was going to stand up against state-sponsored segregation, which ignited the modern civil rights movement. And not too far from there is a small church where a 26-year-old pastor who had been on the job less than 9 months was asked to lead a one-day boycott. And 380 days later, it had changed not only the nation, but the world. Only to come back a decade later, leading marchers from Selma to Montgomery for the full fulfillment of voting rights, where he would extol, how long, not long, truth crushed to the earth shall rise again. And there you have a star emblazoned on marble steps at our state capitol, where the first and thankfully only president of the Confederate States of America was inaugurated. And so, as we look upon these open wounds that have affected our country and at least 35% of people throughout our nation, and we look at the potential unraveling that's happening around us, we have to ask ourselves, is it back or did it never leave before? Was it just lying dormant? Many historians will point to 1776 as a true beginning of this democracy. I would challenge that. I would argue not until 1965 did this democracy truly fulfill its potential, because it was then that we saw the passage of civil rights legislation and voting rights legislation, which truly brought in equality and inclusivity for all of our nation. And so when we think about what some would say happened 247 years ago, I would argue that it's been a mere 58 years that this country has truly decided to reach its potential. And so there's no surprise that there are a few bumps along the road. And so when we look at where we are right now in history, this is a true setback moment historically. But Americans have typically done the hard work and have done the right thing to get us back on track. As a proud son of the South, when that unraveling of norms happens, we tend to see it a little bit more than most. But because we feel that hurt, because we feel that anguish so acutely, with 300 years of degradation, but also tragedy and triumph. In the South, both black and white, Latino, Asian American, Native American, we are more than open to the repaving of hearts. But I believe we all have a collective responsibility to move our region ahead. And if there's true prosperity in the state and the nation, then it can't just happen in pockets. It has to happen in regions. And it must be one that we look at, one that is as historic as the Alabama Black Belt as a region to focus on and to invest in. And yes, while this is certainly about my city of Montgomery, Alabama, I must also include the people around Montgomery who have done so much with so very little. And so you don't have a Catherine Coleman Flowers without the black belt. You don't have an attorney Fred Gray without the black belt. You don't have a Coretta Scott King without the black belt. You don't have a John Lewis without the black belt. You don't have modern luminaries such as Ava DuVernay, Lionel Richie, and Brian Stevenson without the black belt. You certainly don't have the first black mayor in the history of the city of Montgomery's 200 years without the black belt. The great poet Maya Angelou once said, "We bring the gifts that our ancestors gave, and still like dust, we rise." If we are to lead by example, then I ask those of you in this room and those watching to step up and step in and help us change this region. Help us change the Alabama Black Belt from Marion to Selma, from Lowndes County to Tuskegee, and yes, my city of Montgomery. Why? Because we owe it to the ancestors. We owe it to the descendants of change makers and trailblazers who had but a little of what we have in this room today. Most importantly, we owe it to future generations to do just that. Thank you.
Mayor Holt, Mayor Reed, thank you so much for your remarks. I love how you mentioned the importance of listening, and Mayor Reed, the importance of leading by example. These are all themes that I think can help us pave the roads back to each other. And the two of you are leaders who take such pride in your communities, whether it be working in the birthplace of the civil rights movement or operating in a city that's faced tragedy like the Oklahoma City bombing. So I have to ask, when you speak to your constituents, what is something that they represent that they take pride in your communities? Mayor Holt, do you want to start?
Well, I think a few things. I think and I alluded to this in my remarks, I think we've created a unique political culture, right? Where we do listen to each other. And by the way, sometimes you run across leaders who clearly have been told to listen, but they not have been told to actually apply what they're listening into the final outcome. So it is a two-step process.
Absolutely.
And so not only do you listen, but you incorporate those ideas, or at least what you can, into the outcome. And I think in Oklahoma City, we've figured out how to do that. And I think people who are paying attention to the civic life of the community see that, and I think they're proud of it. And I think some of them might even trace some of it back to our response to the Oklahoma City bombing. And by the way, a shout out to, I've got several representatives here from the Oklahoma City National Memorial and Museum here in the room today.
Awesome.
Who literally have a program called Better Conversations, where they try to foster this environment where people can find compromise and good outcomes that are good enough for all of us. And so I think that's something we're proud of. I can give the mayor's speech about, I'm proud of my thunder and I'm proud of our economic development and all that. But I think at its core, a lot of those great outcomes have been the result of a political culture that I think is really healthy, and that's maybe the thing I'm most proud of.
I think we could all use some better conversations, so I can't wait to learn more about that program.
Yeah.
Mayor Reed, what about you?
I think that for residents of our community, we believe that we punch way above our weight in terms of impact, not only in the state, but also the nation itself. And I think what most people are proud of is not only the history, which I referenced, but how we apply it to present day measures that we take, whether it be politically, whether it be economically, or even through education and things along those lines. So you have a lot of pride in the impact that normal, everyday people can make outside of government, outside of business, outside of philanthropy, but nonetheless look for that partnership, look for that collaboration from all of those areas to help propel them forward.
It's awesome. And I don't know about all of you, but when I think about mayors, I think of very diplomatic leaders. And I think the two of you embody this very well. Mayors clearly understand how to coexist because they're doing it. And the two of you, I think, are great examples, right? Mayor Holt, you're on the right side of the political spectrum. Mayor Reed, you fall on the left. So I have to ask, what is your secret as a mayor and how you've learned to coexist with people across the aisle?
I think, understanding that potholes don't have a party, trash pickup doesn't have a party, the basic things that people really want to hear and see from their mayors, spans ideology and political parties. And ultimately, as the chief executive officers of our cities, people look for us to lead, and they look for us to bring about positive results that impact their quality of life. And they don't really care how you vote, and they don't really care what you say. They just want it done. And I think when you learn that, then you find that middle ground, whether it be with a city council person or a state legislator or maybe even a governor, congressman, or a senator that you may have in order to fulfill the requests and the demands of your residents.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, mayors have to get things done. And, at the state and federal levels, it feels as if politics has become entertainment, We don't have that luxury at the city level. We got to get things done. We have to produce those results that Mayor Reed was just talking about. And you can't produce results in an overly ideological fashion. You do come in with your principles, you come in with your worldview, but the reality is there's hardly any American city that is extremely tilted towards one way or the other, even places that people think they are. When it gets down to it, a lot of humans and a lot of Americans are pretty much going to want to see the same outcomes in their cities. And those are going to be pragmatic, middle-of-the-road outcomes. In our city, as I referenced earlier, I mean, we're basically 50-50. So if I were to say, well, I'm a registered Republican, so all the outcomes here have to be conservative Republican outcomes, I would never actually accomplish anything because, with 50% of the populace, you really can't. You have to have a broader consensus than that. And so we'd get nothing done. And guess what? That is what is happening at the state and federal level. Nothing is getting done. But we don't have that luxury. And then when we come together as mayors, we have, I think, the healthiest and most active and most bipartisan national organization in the U.S. Conference of Mayors. Yeah, we get along great because we just try to get things done, and we don't really see party, and we work at the federal level to promulgate policies that are good for cities.
Thank you for that. And you bring up something really interesting. I just wonder how many of us in the room have ever felt that our political culture today, at one time or another, has felt a little bit like a spectator sport? Anyone? Okay, it's a lot of hands. You can put them down. Thank you.
Like professional wrestling, really. And
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think it brings the question of intentions to the forefront, right? Why do you do this work, and why do you continue to do this work? So Mayor Reed, what is your motivation in the work that you do, and has that reason evolved since you started in politics?
It's hard for me to say this, Sophie. I've been elected now to public office for over a decade. And so, when I'm talking to my young professional council and groups, I like to think of myself as being a part of them. They remind me that I'm not. After being in office now this long, I was a county judge before becoming mayor. But I think when I started, in 2012, it was really about using government as an instrument to do good and trying to make sure that we could utilize government to fully meet our residents where they were in a way that would impact them, and not just as something that was convenient or expedient for the person holding public office. And so it's evolved a little bit, I think, from my standpoint, in the sense that I feel more urgency now, having a little bit more experience than I did when I first started, of course. And I feel the weight, if you will, of responsibility to deliver on things that people have heard elected officials talk about for years and now even over a decade. And so that fuels my passion. It fuels my energy to really try to make a difference and to find partners not only in our city, in our state and nation, but throughout the world to help us achieve those goals and objectives.
It's fantastic. Mayor Holt, what about you? Well,
I mean, I think this hotel is busting right now with people just like us who we just are motivated to leave the world a better place than we found it. And maybe in its purest form, I look at that through the prism of my kids. I want my kids to grow up, and when I'm gone, you know, I want them to think that their dad was a good man who tried his best to leave the world better for them, you know? And I think that's what motivates everybody in this room and everybody in this building. Again, we come from different perspectives and we maybe seek slightly different outcomes, but we all have the same pure motivation. And maybe that's one of the other shortfalls in current American life is how much we question each other's motivations. When in reality, that's the first place we could find common purpose and common ground, is that we're all in this for the same reason.
And thank you for that reminder. Yes. And thank you both for driving some of the common ground that we're really seeing today in that shared purpose for getting the work done. You both shared that today, and I think that's a really wonderful sentiment to remember, that no matter where you stand on the political spectrum, we all have that common thread of wanting to do good and get the job done, and you two do that so brilliantly in the work that you do. So thank you for helping us repave those roads.
Thank you, Sophie, very much. Appreciate it.
Appreciate it. Fantastic.
All right, thank you.
All right, how's everyone doing? Good? Okay, I'm so glad you're all here because this next segment is going to be phenomenal. In this next segment, we're exploring a topic that is all too familiar to us all, which is extremism and radicalization. Our next speaker works with an organization called Parents for Peace, which empowers communities to stop the spread of radicalization. And as our speaker is an intervention specialist himself, he has so much to share on this topic because he himself went through his own de-radicalization process as a former member of a white extremist group. And in this next segment, we're gonna talk about real solutions to this very real and difficult issue. But I first ask you to join us and lean into some of these more uncomfortable moments, because when we lean into the uncomfortable, we can create that change. However, I do want to caveat that in this next portion of our program, there will be references to white extremist groups. So if you prefer to step out for a moment and rejoin us in about 10 minutes, I want to give you the opportunity to do so. All right, without further ado, I'm thrilled to welcome Chris Buckley to the stage.
Thank you, thank you. 8 years ago, a documentary clip about the Ku Klux Klan went viral. It features a 32-year-old man and his 4-year-old son. They were both dressed in black hooded KKK regalia. Together, they threw up Sig Heil salutes and they shout white power. Today, that clip fills me with horror. The disturbed father it depicts is me, and the 4-year-old is my son. We're not born to hate. And through this story, I'll take you through some events, or an ingredients list, if you will, of my journey and what led me into extremism, but more importantly, what led me out. So since this is a storyteller studio, we'll start with Act 1, okay? My childhood. We've all got one, right? My childhood was plagued with molestation from a same-sex family member from the time I was around 5 till I was probably 12 or 13. The racism that I experienced at home from my father and his friends, along with the substance abuse and physical abuse that went along with growing up in the 90s from a very impoverished home, kind of set in motion a set of worldviews that I didn't get the opportunity to decide if I wanted or not. So after all that childhood, we're gonna skip ahead because I only have 5 minutes. 9/11, we just had it. And it brought back a really emotional situation that enticed me to join the United States military. While in Afghanistan on a routine patrol, I lost my best friend and comrade, Daniel Wallace, on October 31st, 2008. He took the first round of an enemy bullet over his left eye and didn't make it. There was a moment during that situation that I felt the same hatred that I felt towards the homosexuals at the time, towards Islam and anything Muslim. After I returned home, I was involved in a vehicle accident on a training mission. I broke my back on May 22nd, 2009. That was my introduction to opiate painkillers. So now you see that we're baking the cake, right? We've got the bowl, we've got some molestation, we've got at-home racism, we've got substance abuse, we've got trauma. Not to mention, I was discovering slowly that I was suffering with PTSD. There was a time when I went to the VA with a loaded .38 handgun. Told them, if you send me home with more medication, I'm gonna kill myself. When I got out of the VA 2 hours later with a new prescription, I unloaded the .38 handgun that was in my glove box and I drove the 2 hours home. In closing, I want to talk about what I do now. I am an interventionist. I am an exit peer specialist with Parents for Peace. We do interventions with at-risk, currently radicalized, at all levels of the spectrum individuals from both white supremacy, Islamism, eco-terrorism, Antifa, and the broad spectrum of radicalization that we see in our country. I'm also the founder of a program that is the roadmap of my journey out of extremism and what led me in. It's called the Trauma Recovery Program. It's a moral cognitive program that allows the person that's participating to drive their own recovery pace through thought replacement techniques, through taking inventories of all the things that you're responsible in life and the things that you're not, but finding a way to come to a common term with that and appreciate that you do have a choice. Why do we do what we do? There's a million answers to that. I can only tell you why I do what I do today. After 8 years with Parents for Peace, I do what I do so that I can go back in time and save 5-year-old Chris. I want to acknowledge the fact that my executive director is here with me. Miriam, raise your hand, show everybody. If you have any questions or want to talk more because of the 5 minutes, hit me up or her and we can talk after. Thank you.
Wow. Chris, thank you so much for sharing your story and for your service in Afghanistan. We have so much to dive into, but I want to bring us to this present moment.
Okay.
I'd love to know, are you worried about the current state of our country and some of what you're seeing in the past few years as more and more people fall to hate-based violence? And I'd love to know if you think as a society we're going forwards or backwards at this moment in time.
I can only speak to my experience and what I've witnessed at Parents for Peace. We are seeing a very peculiar time in extremism. We're working with Jewish families who have white supremacist sons. We're working with Hispanic white supremacists and white Islamists, both in and out of the prison system. So I think that before we can move to a point where we have an understanding of extremism, people like me have to tell the story. We have to give the hard part of the conversation that people don't want to hear about, and not to play a victim in the role, but to take accountability of it. And I think that when more stories like mine come forward and more organizations like Parents for Peace that are really doing the work in the trenches and in the outside of the view, we can actually come together and we can bring clinicians, mental health providers, community leaders and schools into this table, and we can really take a bite out of this problem.
Yesterday, you and I were speaking about really the reason for why we do the work we do in conversation with Nicole and a few others. And we realized that really at the root of this problem is that notion that we don't know each other very well, and we have to close that divide. So do you have any advice for us sitting in the room today about how we prevent the fire before it starts and start that process of bringing us closer together?
So I know I only have a couple of seconds, but I want to tell you another story real quick.
Please.
All right. So we just finished in March a documentary called Refuge, and it was released March of 2023, and it's about that topic. my journey and the kindness and the willingness to cross the divide of a Democrat Syrian refugee doctor named BUCKLEY to come and meet me where I was, because I was broken and I wasn't able to do that work myself. It takes the leadership of individuals to cross the aisle, in a political term, or cross the road, or go into the other neighborhood and meet somebody and have that conversation and realize just how alike we are.
Chris, you know, for those of us who may currently have lost touch with family members or who have lost a loved one due to some of the issues that your work focuses on, what's one piece of advice you'd give all of us to rebuild those relationships and repave those connections?
Wow, there would be separate advice for if somebody lost a loved one due to violent extremism, or if they lost a loved one because of violent extremism, right? Like, I mean, so I just want to put out there that we do recover, right? And I'm where I'm at today because of my wife. Every single person on the planet turned away from me when I was at my lowest, except for her. You might be the only person that individual has. Don't turn your back on them, because they can get better and they need you.
Oh my gosh, Chris, thank you for sharing that. What an important reminder that at the root of so much of this is such a human desire to connect, and the loneliness epidemic that we're seeing, especially in the youngest generations, but I think it's something that's in all of us. What do you feel is a message that the next generation really needs to hear when it comes to these difficult conversations, and especially when it comes to politics?
Have them. Like, have them with your friends. You look at kids, and I look at my son, and he's on an amazing baseball team with, sorry, I'm emotional, some of the best people I've ever met. And I watch the way he interacts with those kids that are different from him, and they're special, and there's this connection that somewhere along the lines, our stupidity as adults caused us to give away, right? Watch our children. Learn from them. We don't have to teach them anything. They have a lot to teach us.
And thank you for being emotional.
Yeah.
Don't hold back.
mean,
This is what Story Studio is for, and I think we have to show up fully as ourselves in these conversations if we're going to make any sort of change. And I know you lead so many interventions now in the work that you do, especially around trauma-informed responses. Is there a particular story or an anecdote or a piece of advice you want to leave us with today that we can all take outside of these walls to start bringing us back together?
Yeah. For the longest part of my life, as a combat soldier overseas, as a garrison soldier here, I listened to respond. I listened, and as soon as the conversation started, I had my response building in my head. I didn't know how to listen to understand. And every conversation doesn't require a response. Take time. Think about what is being said, not what you want to hear, and assess appropriately. And be gentle with those that harm you, because hurt people hurt people.
And that's a reminder that I think all of us need to hear, right? Imagine a world where we could all listen with the intent of listening and understanding. And I'm so grateful that you shared your story today, Chris, and how you've gotten to that place. And I know all of us are probably leaving today with that same message. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you, guys.
You're amazing.
Thank you.
Wow. Oh my gosh, I need a second to regroup. We have so many amazing conversations coming your way. So next, we'll explore how flipping narratives can help to repave roads and create a more equal and just future for all. And we're about to hear from two incredible women who are working to end period poverty in Kenya and rural India. In February this year, Senator ORWOBA made international headlines when she unexpectedly got her period on her way to Parliament. This resulted in staining her clothing, and so many people had something to say about it. In that moment, she proceeded to go to work to do her job and legislate. However, it caused upheaval that extended far beyond the parliament walls, and the impact of her work was overshadowed by this incident. So often, this happens with issues surrounding ending period poverty. Let's talk about what it takes to shift that narrative. Please welcome to the stage MEGHA Desai, President of the Desai Foundation, and Senator GLORIA ORWOBA.
How's it going, Senator?
It's going good. I'm a bit nervous, but I'm here.
Good. Hi, guys. I'm MEGHA with the Desai Foundation. We're an organization that works on health, livelihood, and menstrual equity in 8 states in rural India. And we've been working in rural India for about 25 years and doing menstrual equity for about 15. On February 14th, which happens to be my birthday, earlier this year, our Senator ORWOBA here made headlines around the world because she got her period. I'm gonna pause there. She made headlines around the world because she got her period. The Senator and I have been doing this work for a really long time, and it's not an issue that she got her period. It's an issue that it made global headlines. It's an issue that I, sitting in New York City, was able to hear about this incident on the Senate floor of Kenya. There is so much shame, lack of information, and silence around periods. But why? Senator, why do you think your incident made global headlines?
Where do I start? I think it was so strange because I'm pretty sure other senators were having their periods as well.
I'm pretty sure that that's true, yeah.
But suddenly it was about Senator GLORIA ORWOBA's period. I think it's the stigma. There's just crazy stigma about seeing blood, this type of blood, you know? It's like we're okay with the blood that comes off when you get a little cut, but the blood from your vagina, that's crazy. So it's the stigma, and it was more like, suddenly I felt that senators or Senate does not belong to women because there was something like, ooh, we have a woman in Senate who got an accidental stain. So it was a crazy week for me there. Yeah.
I can't even imagine. In India, which is where we do our work, the silence around menstruation is deafening. 71% of girls in India don't even know what their period is before they get it. And I know the statistic is quite similar in some other areas in Africa. And the silence is really debilitating, right? Because it leads to stigmas and all of these other issues. Why do we feel that women are so embarrassed to talk, even amongst themselves sometimes, about periods?
Well, maybe because since time immemorial, periods have been something that we shouldn't talk about. I mean, I am Christian, and just go to the book of Leviticus. It's all about the stigma surrounding menstruation. Yeah. And in Africa, we have a lot of cultural barriers in terms of, should you even talk about it? Should you even think it? Should anyone know at this particular moment? We at Clinton Global Initiative stage, like, my goodness, could she be wearing a tampon, you know? It's crazy. So it's the cultural barriers. It's just historically been posed as a dirty and negative thing. But I can tell you that today we have about maybe, I don't know, maybe 100 people, 60, 70 people sitting in this room. And they're all here because of a missed period. I mean, I can tell you. Yeah. There is a woman somewhere who missed a period, and then suddenly we have Leah in the audience who is here, and we have Senator GLORIA. So I don't know why it's okay for us to introduce ourselves. Like, hi, I'm GLORIA. You know, I come from a missed period. So we need to normalize the idea that menstruation is really normal, and it's a natural act. Yeah.
Absolutely. You know, I grew up in a really progressive house, right, here in America, with Hindu parents. And despite that, there were so many stigmas in my country, in my home, around periods.
Oh, in America?
In America, yes.
Wow.
And in fact, this is not a uniquely African or South Asian issue. This is an issue all over the world. Here in the US, the stigmas are around whether you can jump in the water and not be eaten by sharks. However, in my house, I was not allowed to pray. And it was a really difficult way for me to relate to how I can appreciate my God is supposed to love me 365. And I am supposed to love myself. And so it's be confident, but you can't pray.
I'm surprised because America is a first world.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you would think that coming from Africa, you know, we are considered a developing country in Kenya.
Well,
so I'm surprised to hear that you had that stigma, I mean, in New York, downtown New York.
Well, I have Indian parents. But the one thing that's so interesting is where these stigmas come from, right? I wanted to pause and kind of reflect. Where did these come from? You know, thousands of years ago, when women were traveling, you know, 15 kilometers to get water for their village and their home, what they were doing was saying, sister, I got you. You're bleeding, give me your vessel, you rest, I'll go get your water. And it was about compassion and care. And then over hundreds of years of patriarchy and colonialism, it became around control. No, you can't touch the water because you're gonna poison it. And all of these stigmas have stemmed from that. How can we stop making women feel like second-class citizens in their own home? You know, in India, women can't even sit at the dinner table when they're bleeding. You know, what are the things that we can do to change that?
For starters, we can talk about menstruation without having to giggle, you know? It's literally a normal thing. You know, it's, I will try and take the conversation back to so many things that we have been able to destigmatize, particularly in Africa. We have the female genital mutilation, which was very normal, and we would talk about it and say, you know, it's time to take our daughters to get circumcised, and it was very normal. And then when we started having the conversation on how that is not a practice that we should keep on doing, then it became very normal to say that this is wrong and we are going to take the next steps to change it. So for starters, I think we need to talk about menstruation. You know, we need to be proud of it. When I'm going round to, I mean, since the incident on February 14th, I will tell you that I was pushing so much in the field of women empowerment and legislation in IT and all sorts of things, but suddenly it was like, hey, there is the period senator. So it sort of threw me back, and I guess God has a way to say, you know, you can just focus on one thing and be really good at, you know, menstruating and legislating about menstruating. And maybe the other things will sort of take a backseat. But I can tell you, when we started talking about it in Kenya, 3 things happened within the month of February, at least within the 6 weeks from the incident in Senate. We had a budget of 260 million Kenya shillings per year to provide free sanitary towels to schoolgirls. And I said to the president, man, we are bleeding, and we are many. We are 52% as a population, and out of the 52%, at least more than 30% are menstruating. So you have a bleeding nation, literally. And we need to figure out how to make menstrual hygiene products, you know, affordable. And I said, so 260 million is not gonna be enough.
Yeah.
We need $1 billion. And he was like, huh? Well, you know, $1 billion. I said, yeah, 1 billion, and that's the starting point. We have to progressively, you know, put up that budget. So we ended up with about 940 million Kenya shillings. I mean, if I knew that I just needed to accidentally have my period in the car on my way to, I would have done this a long time ago. I would have been on my period daily just to get that budget out. I would be like, I'm bleeding, this is it, you know, we need 1 billion more.
That's
so that to me was one of the impacts that I felt
Yeah.
that the incident brought forward. But I will also tell you, everybody started talking about menstruation. Our brothers, our fathers, our boyfriends, husbands. It was like, yeah, it's that time of the month. And there was a conversation around why is your blood so red? Why is it not as pink as my wife's and whatever?
Yeah.
So the stigma sort of dropped. And the billboards, because, you know, I was dealing with a lot of shame and bullying on social media, particularly the first 2 weeks. And I was pushing back a lot. So some of my friends said, you know what? So what, you had your periods. We're going to put up a billboard.
Yeah.
I thought it was crazy. I was like, I don't need these friends. But then, and one of them paid for a billboard, and it was like, you know, menstruate, anything you can do, I can do. Bleeding, menstruation is normal.
I loved that billboard.
And once the billboard was up in this very crowded place, the impact was instant.
Yeah.
And so I understood the advocacy element of it. So we need to talk about anything that we need to solve. We must start by talking about it.
Yeah.
And then we can now go into the solutions. The advocacy is a very important key. Yeah.
At my organization, the Desai Foundation, we are focused on combating all of the different issues around menstrual health. So education, access, stigmas, and we work in 8 states. And I think one of the conversations that I've been having here at CGI, as well as in my 15 years working in this space, is how people kind of pigeonhole what this issue is about. But in my experience, menstrual equity is about education, it's about women's rights, it's about health, it's about climate, it's about mental health. It's literally about the longevity and the livelihoods of these women. It's about economic empowerment. How can we together combat this and push back on people trying to pigeonhole what this is about and expand the definition of how important this issue is?
You forgot to say that it's about humanity. I mean, if you kill all the women and the girls on the planet, that's it, we're done. They're no more babies. There's no menstruation. There's no procreation. There is nothing. Humanity is gone.
Yeah.
And I think if you put that in perspective, then we start having a real conversation about it. I know that there are several ways to deal with it. My immediate action plan at the time when I had the incident was, are you guys serious? Yeah, I mean, I have a stain. I was lucky enough to have my bodyguard, actually. I was lucky enough to, my bodyguard had a sanitary pad, you know, he was like, oh, madam, you need this. I was lucky enough to have that. But how many schoolgirls don't have pads to just say, I'm going to change into this, and then I'm going to
poverty. It's on the slide, but I forgot to say it.
I'm going to go ahead with my day. We forget to think about the actual statistics of girls having the fear of staining their school uniforms, and so therefore they're like, oh, I'm on my period, I'm not going to school. I'm just going to sit at home and bleed it out for 4 days, which is an equivalent of around 6 weeks in an academic school term. That's crazy. The perspective that I think for me in that moment, and I was very mad at my colleagues who asked me to leave the chambers, because I was fighting for a lot of serious stuff on that day. I mean, I was vice chair of the ICT committee, and I wanted to, you know, push some agenda, and suddenly I had to leave chambers. And I mean, that could be a privilege point of it. Now think about the schoolgirl who doesn't have a choice, but you know, they go like, you have to go home and change. So the perspective around menstruating with dignity and being able to manage your periods with dignity, it's bigger than I hear people talking about tampon tax. Yeah, tampon tax.
22 states in America.
I mean, you guys are talking about taxes. We just want to have pads. Like, we're not even at the stage of the taxes. We are just like, can we have sanitary pads? Can we be able to go out to class, to work, and not feel like for the 4 or 7 days that I'm menstruating, I have to be in a menstrual hut, for instance, because we have those in Africa, or that, you know, I'm restricted. So I would say putting it in a box really annoys me, because when we talk about climate change, and the environmentalists I respect the work that we're doing in that perspective. But when we talk about menstruation, it's this thing that we need to just fix and deal and move on with. But in reality, it's humanity. That's what we are trying to protect. That's what we are trying to deal with. So I would say 2 things. In Africa, the period poverty has everything to do with the poverty. So if we're going to address the period poverty, we have to deal with the poverty. So I'm sorry to say this, but every other company that's importing sanitary pads to Kenya from China or wherever, they're not helping with the period poverty. What they're doing actually is exporting the jobs and further pushing the poverty lines. So at the end of the day, this is blood money, and the people bleeding have to benefit from the blood money. I keep saying, and it sounds very radical because, you know, we just got off a conversation on radicalism, but I keep saying that when you look at the industry of menstrual hygiene products, literally, I can count with one hand the number of women who are running those businesses.
Yeah.
And yet, we are the ones who bleed.
Yeah.
This is blood money. This is our money. We should be able to be in that industry and say, you know, I don't like wearing this sanitary pad because it has A, B, C, D, so maybe I can tweak it this way, you know.
Absolutely.
So my thinking throughout is, let us drive that industry. Let's make products that are affordable. Let's localize the manufacturing down to where the women and the girls are menstruating, and let's be beneficiaries of that industry.
Yep.
And sorry, I know we're running out of time. So I have gotten asked this question a lot of times in terms of their 360 look on it, because disposable pads are considered very bad for the environment. And environmentalists and all the experts on the climate change will probably look at me when I say this, but I have been trying to get statistics of the pollution in terms of sanitary pads and what those figures are, so we can figure out what we are mitigating. But I've also been trying to have very candid conversations about reusable pads. And you know, are you from Asia or are you from the US?
India. Oh, I'm from the US, but I'm Indian descent.
Sorry, it sounds like, yeah?
Yeah.
And it seems like the reusable sanitary pads, which is literally the cloth that you bleed on and wash, is being pushed so much in Africa and in Asia. And so the question becomes, this pollution on the one-time disposable pads, is it really just in Africa and in Asia? Because I don't see nobody saying, let's send reusable pads to America. Let's send reusable pads to Europe. I see them talking about menstrual cups, more progressive, innovative ideas. So we have a lot of problems in Africa because there is an attempt to deal with the period poverty and give some measures to menstruate with dignity, but nobody's really thinking through what it means and the effects of solutions that are not really accurate solutions at this time.
Yeah, I know, I completely agree. And I think that we have to really think about the folks on the ground and the people that are receiving these products and the overall impact of the issue.
The people bleeding.
Yes, and that people bleed. You know, at the Desai Foundation, we are creating pads made by women, for women, locally.
Let's talk.
I really appreciate
we should talk about like eco-friendly, biodegradable.
We do need to wrap up. So we're gonna say
progressive
thank
ideas.
you, and we're gonna say thank you so much to everyone and to CGI for talking about period poverty on the stage of CGI.
Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much again, Senator ORWOBA and MEGHA, for that conversation. As we're talking about repaving roads today, it seems like we have some actionable solutions on our hands, right? In that last session, we talked about how we need to address the silence that we oftentimes face in the midst of these issues, the stigmas that we have to break down, but what a great reminder that sometimes it just takes recognizing each other's humanity to bring us back to the same table. So I'm thrilled to introduce our next segment with two incredible women who are rewriting narratives to include those who are typically excluded from important conversations and histories. So without further ado, please welcome to the stage, first we're going to hear from actress, activist, and founder of the YU Taya Foundation, Patricia Velasquez, followed by Gen Z icon and founder of the Intersectional Environmentalist, Leah Thomas.
Good afternoon already. Thank you, Sophie. In 2019, I found myself sweating at the Clinton's Foundation's office. And trust me, I have not started my lovely menopause yet. I was just so nervous because I was surrounded by these incredible individuals. And President Clinton had such a commanding presence. And he said to us, I have invited each one of you here today because I would hope that you are leaders of your organizations and you will do everything you can to help Venezuela. So when we finished the meeting, my sister and I were walking on Times Square, and we were saying, wow, two YU indigenous women walking in New York, and we just met President Clinton. But really, we were just so hopeful because we thought, maybe we are going to be able to help our indigenous YU people. And maybe we are going to be able to help our country of Venezuela. You see, the YU community, it's about 500,000 people that they live in Venezuela and in Colombia. It's a matriarchal community. And I'm sure many of you are aware of the refugee crisis from my country with, about 7.5 million people that have fled. But I didn't grow up in the YU community. My mom did. This is a very poor community, and she is a family from 12 brothers and sisters. But she was able to go to school because my uncle, Nerio, Tio Nerio, he got a job in telegraphy. And he sent my mom to go to become a teacher. But in order to graduate, my mom will have to teach someone to write and read. So she taught my grandmother. Many years later, I get a call from my mother saying that my uncle had passed. And before he died, he said, do not forget about the YU. Seeing my mom so sad, I felt like I had to do something about it. So I started digging. And I found that extreme drought and climate change have caused access to clean water almost impossible. And even farming had been affected, causing food insecurity. And UNICEF classified in 2002 the YU region as almost one of the poorest in Latin America, with one kid between the ages of 0 and 6 years old dying from malnourishment. So I thought, maybe we can start a little preschool since my parents are educators, and this will guarantee that the kids will get 2 meals a day. So we did that with some of the help of our friends and started the YU Taya Foundation. Many years later, then we have over 7,500 children, but we didn't know that we were just getting prepared for what was to come. 4 years ago, I received a call from Jose Andres. I'm sure you saw him earlier on this stage. And he said, Patricia, we have all this food on the Colombian side, vegetables and grains. If we get it to you, can you get them through the border? And we said, yes. So we started bringing 1 ton, 2 tons, 3 tons of food from an organization named Acceso. Acceso is sustainable farming. And a lot of these farmers on the Colombian side are actually Venezuelan refugees on the Colombian side. And by the time we get it in the border, they have traveled 1,200 kilometers. This organization is led by an extraordinary individual named Frank Justra. Now, over 4,000 kids are eating vegetables every day thanks to Acceso, and almost 71,000 people have been benefited because of it. And then, through the CGI community, we met Ann Lee from CORE, who has become a founding, I would say, pillar for the Wayutaya Foundation in our sustainability. And Ann introduced us to Center for Disaster and Philanthropy, who then gave us money to build a well. And now, 37,000 people have received free, clean water because of this well. And then through the CGI community, we met Direct Relief. And almost 200,000 people are receiving medicine and supplies all throughout Venezuela. And even during the worst of COVID, this help never stopped. But where we are now is that we know that at some point, this aid is going to end. But we have to turn this humanitarian aid into a sustainable aid. And you know what? We will. Because indigenous communities, it doesn't matter how many wars have been out there, how many cultures have disappeared, we have managed to remain. Because we have been taught from generation to generation that we only take what we need, we share, and we give back to the land. Just like my mother did by teaching her mom to read and write. And together with the CGI community, yes, we are repaving the road. We've helped over 1 million people. But the real help is for us as individuals, because every little action we take can have such a ripple effect that will affect positive change in all of us, just like my uncle did by sending my mom to school. Thank you.
Hello, everybody. To start off, I'm curious if any of you all know any black park rangers. If not, it's okay, because you're looking at one. Technically, I was an intern, but, you know, close enough. And I'm going to tell you all the story of how I went to rural Kansas, decided to be a park ranger, and then suddenly dedicated my life to environmental activism. So I grew up in a suburb right outside of St. Louis, Missouri, called Ferguson-Florissant. And that summer, I decided to go to college and go to California, as many Missourians kind of dream of. And I decided to declare a major in environmental science and policy, and I was so excited. I spent a lot of my childhood running around catching toads, and thankfully my mom didn't make me feel too weird about it. And when I learned about the environmental science program, I got so excited. But about 2 weeks before I went off to California to start my journey, I got a call from a friend asking if I knew a gentleman by the name of Michael Brown. And while I didn't know his name then, his name was implanted in my memory from that point forward, and a lot of American people's memories. And the Ferguson Uprising started in my community. And I was there for about 2 weeks before going off to California to begin my program. And when I started my environmental science program, I was the only black student in my classroom. And while we were learning about things like the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act and all of these incredible environmental policies, I couldn't help but feel inside that what's the point of the Clean Air Act if people who look like me and black and indigenous and people of color all over the country didn't even have the right to breathe? And the more I dug into environmental justice data, I started to see really startling statistics. Like 70% of African Americans in this country live in communities that frequently violate federal air quality standards and things like the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. So I couldn't celebrate, and I had a lot of hurt in my heart for my community of St. Louis and Ferguson. And I really spent a lot of time in nature and wanted to heal. So I decided, okay, I think I'll try to be a park ranger. And I really wanted to go to Yosemite or something like that. But I applied really late, and I was placed in the least visited national park in all of the National Park Service system. And I decided that following summer after Ferguson to head to Nicodemus, Kansas. If anyone in this room knows that, shout out to you, because I sure didn't. We had about 0 to 2 visitors a day, so I had a lot of free time. And I hung out with a lot of farmers, got on their combine, was riding around, and it was such a healing experience because Nicodemus, Kansas is such a special town. It's actually the first town west of the Mississippi that after slavery, freed African Americans went to create their own homes. They used their hands and any tools that they could find to dig into the soil and create dugouts. And eventually they created the first school, the first post office, and a thriving Black community. And it was there I fully healed, or I thought I kind of did, from the events of Ferguson. And I felt so empowered learning about this story. And even though I was the only Black student in my environmental program, it was then that I truly understood that the stories of my people are there. Black history is environmental history, and though many of our stories might be buried in the soil, they're there. We have the stories of people like George Washington Carver, who isn't just responsible for all of his peanut butter inventions. He also is the father of regenerative organic agriculture and a pioneer of CSA programs. We also have the stories of people like Betty Reed Soskin, a 100-year-old Black park ranger. And I got really excited to start sharing those stories and started to think, what if I learned about people like Betty when I was younger? What if I learned about the true history and the true Black American environmental history when I was younger? Maybe that would have made me an environmentalist even younger. And what would a new generation look like if they saw themselves reflected in environmental movements and policy and stories? So I set out to do that, and I know we're running out of time, but I founded an organization called Intersectional Environmentalists that does just that, because we want everyone to know that they're included in the environmental movement, and we want to make sure that those stories are not buried in the soil, and that you all will know them, so you can know the names of people like Betty Reed Soskin, George Washington Carver, and Dr. Robert Bullard, the same way we know the names of people like John Muir. Thank you.
Leah, Patricia, thank you so much for sharing your stories. I find it so inspiring that the work that both of you are doing is really ensuring that marginalized communities are written back into the narratives or pulled out from the soil, Leah, that you just mentioned, and brought back into these stories. So Patricia, I'd love to start by asking you, what is one thing about the impact of your work that surprised you or could surprise us here today?
I guess the capacity of humans to expand and learn in extreme circumstances. Our team, yes, we had an organization that was doing education and had a lot of kids, but when we had the opportunity to bring the vegetables, they learn it. And there's this massive distribution. And then the medicine. And then I think that's what's the resiliency of the team and people in extreme circumstances. That is the thing that has surprised me the most.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And Leah, I'd love to ask you, oftentimes in this work, and I'm sure in your work in particular, there are people trying to come to support the work that you're doing, but oftentimes the actions that they take do the opposite and aren't actually effective. Can you give us an example of maybe a time where that's happened to you, and what can we do to ensure that when we're providing support to people, especially in the realms of the work that you're doing, it's actually impactful?
I would say wealth redistribution is incredibly important, and I often say if you were to give out $10,000, $50,000 grants to grassroots environmental justice organizations, you would see more change than giving $1 million to one of the big green, most funded environmental organizations, because more positively, a lot of people of color, they have the solutions, they just need the amplification and support and resources to scale their nature-based solutions and things like that. So I would say one thing that doesn't work is assuming that people don't know what they need in their own communities. But they know if there's a weird smell when they drive over the highway and there's, you know, a landfill or something like that. They know if their water is a little funky or discolored and that something's wrong. So it's really important to validate people's experiences and their knowledge of their own communities and be there as an ally to really amplify and support what they're doing.
Thank you so much for sharing that. And Leah, I'd love to ask you the same first question I asked Patricia. What is something that you've noticed about the impact of the work that you're doing that might surprise us here in the room today?
I'm really excited. I'm a curriculum person. All of my family, they're educators, and we're seeing rapid changes in environmental storytelling and curriculums to this day. And a lot of educators are also using social media, which I never thought possible. But I kind of ramble about all of this on social media, and I have a lot of friends that do the same. And there are a lot of teachers that are really trying to connect with their students and utilize social media and other things because their curriculums might not be updated yet to make sure that environmental history is as diverse as possible. But the students are saying, I saw this on TikTok, I saw this on Instagram, I'm learning about it at home, and I want to learn about it in the classroom. So that was really shocking to me that Gen Z is really leading the way and taking their education into their own hands. There's also some concerns there because Gen Zers go to TikTok before they go to Google.
Yes.
So we need to make sure there's some sort of academic integrity in those spaces as well.
Absolutely. And both of you work in spaces that I think can very quickly become divisive or polarized. So Patricia, how have you been able to overcome this, and any words of wisdom for us here today who want to repave that road, but the space gets so heated before we can even start the repaving?
That's a wonderful question because, I mean, in the United States, we're dealing with it as we speak. You know, we work in a country where there is so much political division, and it becomes a challenge when you're trying to do good. I have found through experience that the only way that we can really create a difference is for us, regardless of what our political individual beliefs might be, is to not be political when we do the work. And everyone needs the help. So we don't judge what party you belong to when you need the food or need the medicine. And we have seen that as a result of this, it's like a bubble of change and positive change that is spreading throughout the country, and that allows us to do the work. And I think it can create that ripple effect that I mentioned before.
Absolutely. And I think, Leah, for our generation, you know, we, for the most part, all agree that we need to take action on the climate crisis, but I'm sure you still find yourself in spaces where there is a lot of division. How do you overcome this in the work you do?
I try to take a really intersectional approach to climate action because health justice is also climate justice. So even when we're talking about housing reform or racial justice, all of these things connect back to environmentalism in some way. So I really try to meet people where they're at. I also speak at churches sometimes, which is really fun. Dolly Parton has this quote where she says, if you care about God, you should care about the planet because it's one of God's creations. So I don't care what gets you to protecting the environment. Everybody has something, whether they just like to spend time outside, whether it's faith-based, whether they're a climate activist. But I think really understanding that not everyone is going to be a climate activist, and that's okay, but that all roads lead back to the environment, and just being compassionate to find people and meet them where they're at.
Thank you both for identifying the common thread in all of this, which is that we need to meet people where they are and listen to the needs of the communities that we're impacting. So Patricia, Leah, thank you so much for sharing your stories and for being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
That was so great. What a session. First of all, thank you to all of you for still being here and for being a part of this dialogue. I think even if one one thing resonated with you today, we can all leave and start repaving the roads back to each other. Because ultimately, it just takes one conversation to chip away at someone else's echo chamber. And I think that's really something actionable that we can take from any of the remarks that we heard. So I just want to say thank you again to Lindsay, the CGI team, and all of you for participating in this conversation. And if I could leave you with one final thought. When it comes to repaving these roads or bridging the divide, it all starts with a conversation. And I want us to all leave today thinking, how will you ever change someone's mind or open someone's mind if you can't understand it first? Thank you all so much. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll see you at the next session.
Thank you for joining this session. Please make your way out of the room and refer to the app for other programming options.